Really excited about, all of those elements, but even the coaching and the actual training of coaches of how to coach the entire child or young person as opposed to just the technique of the skill. So I'm really looking forward to that. So as we kind of shift now, because we have David up here, but James, you were pivotal in actually me meeting David. So won't you just tell people just how you met David, and then I'll ask David to tell his story.
So one of Northland's longtime friends is Eddie Waxer from the global sports movement. There's no position, there's no office. This is just a man who was passionate about using sports for the gospel. He was a tennis player, and someone befriended him at a tennis tournament in an elevator. Do you know Jesus? That's literally the story. Well, the global sports movement has so many countries now and resources like Ready, Set, Go. And so when I went to the conference that was here in Orlando, I got to meet this great guy and got to help this past year at the college.
Awesome. Well, and then you introduced me to David, and David and I think we almost like talk every week these days. And so, David, won't you but before we kind of get into the college aspect of John Melvin, won't you just give us a kind of a rough kind of overview and summary of your life and your journey, your faith journey?
Yeah, I wish I would have got to hear this speech when I was 10 years old. I grew up in a Baptist church in a small town in Louisiana, went to Sunday school every Sunday, Wednesday night service, was part of the Royal Rangers. But sports was my life. I mean, it was all I knew how to do. I played probably all of the sports on the list, baseball, soccer, everything that I could probably play. That's all I wanted to do.
Even badminton?
Even badminton.
Okay,
played badminton. But baseball, football, basketball, all of it, And I was always told I was too small to play in college, so I just took it upon myself to say, watch me, And I worked hard, and I ended up playing 2 sports in college, played baseball and football in college. But by the time I was 17 and in college, my relationship with Christ was non-existent. I was still a believer. I just wasn't going to church. I wasn't praying anymore. My whole life was surrounded about, baseball practice, football practice, score as many touchdowns as I can. It was all about the outcome and the performance and not the impact. By the time I was 26, I was coaching professional baseball. I spent 20 years in professional baseball as a minor league coach and a major league scout for the Milwaukee Brewers. By the time I was 34, I had everything you could think of, living in penthouse condos, driving fancy cars, all the materialistic things that, people would praise me about, but I was depressed, and I didn't know why. I was like, I started praying at that time, like, God, why am I so depressed? What is going on? I have everything in my life, but, I'm miserable. And, it took a baseball camp that I was working one day, and I asked all the players at the camp, who would you pick for your number 1 draft choice? If you could pick any player from any year, and they started blurting out names like Barry Bonds and Mickey Mantle and, Babe Ruth and all. And one 8-year-old in the back said, I would pick God first. And at that time, it kind of hit me, but it didn't talk to me as much until I got home that night and started praying some more, saying, God, why am I depressed? What do I need to do? And at that point, it hit me that 8-year-old kid told me what I needed to do, and that was put God first in my life and change my priorities. And instead of using sport as, the focus on being the performance and things like that, to an impact. Because when I reach the pearly gates and meet God, he's not worried about how many championships I won, how many players I got drafted, or none of that stuff. He wants to know how many people I impact and how many seeds we plant. So, it's kind of been a long road, but I'm grateful for it. And, it taught me a lot of lessons, and now I can share it with other people.
So you were in your 30s when that transition happened in your life. So where, I would say that you're not in your 30s anymore. Not that you look old at all, So, but okay, what has that transition led you to now, and what you're being kind of a part of now?
Yeah, I mean, once I realized that my relationship with Christ was the most important thing, it didn't just transform overnight. It took some time. I moved back to Louisiana, watched my kids grow up, and got to watch them graduate from high school, which I missed a lot of their life growing up in professional baseball. But when I was coaching, before I started pro ball, I coached a kid named John Melvin at a high school that I graduated from. And he was just that first kid that I had a relationship with. I love all my players that I've ever coached, but he was that first kid that I had that relationship with. I took him to some college visits. He ended up signing with UL and Lafayette and to play football and run track. Well, after I got out of professional baseball, or while I was in professional baseball, he was killed in a motorbike accident. I felt like I lost my brother. At the time, I didn't know his sister. She was in nursing school when I coached him. But about 10 years later, when I went through a divorce, moved back home to be around my kids, I was still depressed, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. But I ran into his sister at lunch one day, and we ended up dating and getting married. And our focus now is to just make an impact. And we use John Melvin's name as his legacy, because he was a kid that would light up a room. He was just that prime example student. So we've done a lot to really try to help impact the young generation, all the way through professional athletes, to make them use sports as a vehicle to make an impact, and not just focus on the outcome and the championships.
Yeah, so with that history of coaching John Melvin, and then eventually marrying his sister, about 5 years ago, it led you two to actually start something, a college around sports. So tell us a little bit about that journey.
Right. We lived in New Orleans, Louisiana. One of my daughters was at a performing arts high school in New Orleans, but during the COVID pandemic, we had 2 kids in college, and my younger daughter was about to go to Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, and they were just getting pushed away from religion, getting political agendas forced on them. They were at these regionally accredited Division I schools, but they were not getting a good education. They were not getting prepared for a career. My son would call me and say, "Dad, I can't write the essay I want to write, because if I don't write what the teacher wants me to say, or how to want me to vote, and if I say anything about Jesus or anything, I get penalized." So me and my wife just started talking about it, and we were like, how can we help? I felt God was tapping me on the shoulder and said, "I need you to do something." I had no idea what we were doing. We hired a law firm and a consulting group, and they said, "This is how you start a small college." So 4 years ago, we started the campus in Louisiana. 3 years ago, we started one in Pensacola, and then this is going to be our second year here in the Central Florida area. So it's been...
So it's about 5 years old, 3 different...
4 years old.
If you want to clap for you, it's awesome. I mean, like, when David was telling me the story, I'm like, who just sits around in their living room going, "Hey, I want to start a college"? So you did. You started, and 5 years later, you got 3 campuses, roughly about 250 student athletes. So won't you roughly tell us what the model is? What is the John Melvin Christian University College model?
Well, we knew when we started talking to the consultant that we needed 50 students to break even the first year. Well, being in professional baseball, my network, I knew with the new NCAA rules and transfer portal and NIL stuff, there was a lot of players still looking for a place to play. They had 4,000 kids in the transfer portal, the first year that didn't have a place to go after. So we knew we could get 50 students there. So we started recruiting athletes first, and used that as our initial class to bring in. We started off with 89 students the first year, got up to 164 students the second year. Our classes are online, but the students come to campus. They go to study hall twice a week. We go to Motivational Monday, which is our chapel service, life skills training. So we do that to where they stay grounded in their faith. And we give them every opportunity to get better academically, athletically, and spiritually, but we hold them accountable. We make sure they follow up on their grades. We check their grades every week. If they're falling behind, they get extra study hall, they get pulled from practice. But sports is such a great vehicle to make an impact. I mean, there's no other organization that's going to fill LSU Tiger Stadium with 110,000 fans than football. And what better way to make an impact with getting that type of people in one place and doing something other than just scoring goals and touchdowns and things like that.
Yeah. What are some things that you see in the college realm, particularly around athletics, that actually concern you?
Again, like everything you talk about, I mean, it's becoming where sports is the focus for everybody's life. The parents are always like, "Oh, if you make it to the high school level, your life's going to get better. If you make it to college, your life's going to get better. If you make it to the pros, your life's going to get better. If you make it to heaven, your life's going to get better." I mean, that's what we want. We want to make sure they're focused on the priorities and not get sucked into the materialistic things that I was sucked into. And James could tell you, he was there with us last year with our first year here in the Orlando area. The first Motivational Monday that James set up for us, we give out exit tickets, and they fill out a form. And I think 47 students out of 100 filled out saying they wanted to get baptized, they wanted to get to know Christ for the first time, they wanted to have a better relationship with Christ. So 47 out of 100 students the first week we were there, we knew we were making an impact, and that's what it's all about.